and look you in the eye.
Hey, good evening everyone, and welcome to live show 157, our first Wednesday edition for a long time, as we officially return to our classic two-show lineup, Sundays and Wednesdays. Apparently the world is now producing enough global nonsense, digital surveillance creep, revisionist history, proxy wars and peace plans written by people who seem to be allergic to peace, that one show a week simply just wasn't enough to keep up. So tonight is all about one thing: how governments, banks, institutions and entire alliances are rewriting reality in real time, from Stalin to smartphones, from famine myths to behavioural biometrics, from defensive alliances to the 28-point peace plan that somehow contains very little peace at all. This is the Global Gaslighting Project, live show 157. And by the end of tonight, you will know exactly why the world feels like it's been rewritten, rebranded and resold, and why none of the rewriting is accidental. All this from our fully equipped studio here in Minsk, not filmed in a gloomy living room that looks like the Adams family basement, not mumbled out in a shaky street walk with 57 ums per minute. Professional research, real analysis. Let's begin. If you really wanted to understand the modern world, you don't have to start with elections or speeches or treaties. You start with the stories people tell about the past, because nothing reveals the health of a political culture quite like its relationship with history. And ours, unfortunately, is currently swirling somewhere down the geopolitical toilet. Take Stalin, for example, has been a one-dimensional cartoon villain in the Western imagination, a man whose entire historical footprint can be reduced to a mustache, paranoia, and the occasional gulag. That's the entire figure, neatly packaged and child-proofed, ready for modern consumption. It's a wonderful story, simple, digestible, and more importantly, politically convenient. But it isn't the whole picture, because the same regime that presided over the 1930s terror and also reorganised the country the size of a continent under invasion. It uprooted and relocated entire industrial sectors thousands of kilometres in a matter of months. It absorbed the most devastating assault in modern military history. And yes, it destroyed roughly 80%. That's 80% of the Nazi Germany's ground forces. That's the part you don't hear very often in the Western documentaries. The part where the Red Army did the heavy lifting while Britain and America were still deciding which beaches they liked best. And the Soviet Union paid for this with around 27 million lives, most of them civilians. After the war, Western publics broadly acknowledged this reality. Then the Cold War happened, and magically, that entire memory faded. Somehow over the decades, the majority of Westerners came to believe that World War II was won largely by the United States, assisted by a cameo appearance from the UK, while the Soviets mostly cheered from the sidelines. It's curious how that works. And then there's the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Today it's used as Exhibit A in the argument that Stalin and Hitler were basically ideological soulmates. But the truth is far less dramatic and more depressing. For 6 years, the Soviet Union attempted to create a collective security system with Britain and France to contain Nazi Germany. The internal instructions from London and Paris to their negotiators can be summarised in 2 words: go slowly. After half a decade of Western dithering, Soviet intelligence concluded accurately that Britain and France had no intention of standing up to Hitler, so Moscow took the only option left, a brutally pragmatic, temporary pact that with the very enemy they knew they would eventually have to fight. And then comes Poland, portrayed today exclusively as an innocent victim in the pact, which is true but not the whole truth, because the same Poland had early signed its own non-aggressive pact with Germany, helped to carve up Czechoslovakia, and actively sabotaged attempts to form a genuine anti-Nazi coalition. History is complicated, but in modern political storytelling, complicated is inconvenient, and inconvenient must be erased. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, is how foundational complexities become flattened into moral cartoons that are then used to justify whatever today's political agenda requires. The past becomes a weapon, and once you weaponize memory, it stops being history at all. Which brings us to one of the most weaponized historical narratives of the last century, a famine that really happened, a tragedy that killed millions, but which has now been polished, sharpened, and sold as a political instrument for the modern geopolitical needs. The famine of the 1932-33 was one of the most enduring and emotional tragedies of the 20th century, but the vision of the story popular today, the Holodomor genocide narrative, is not just a simple retelling of history. It is a carefully engineered political construction, assembled piece by piece across decades by people who needed the famine not as history, but as ammunition. Start with the term itself. Holodomor was not the word used by survivors at the time. It was coined later by Ukrainian nationalists in 1930s, long after the famine, as part of the broader ideological campaign to portray the Soviet state not as catastrophically incompetent and ideologically fanatical, but as uniquely evil, ethnically targeted genocidal machine. This narrative was almost instantly embraced by Nazi Germany, whose propaganda machine understood perfectly how useful such a story would be. For the Reich, the famine became proof of Soviet barbarism and a recruitment tool for Ukrainian collaborators, including the SS Galicia Division. Jump forward to the 1950s. As the Cold War heats up, Washington discovers this narrative and realizes it fits beautifully with the freedom versus totalitarianism marketing campaign. In 1958, a US Senate subcommittee showcased the famine as ideological evidence against the Soviets. By the late 1980s, a Montreal-based International Commission of Inquiry, operating largely within national émigré communities, endorsed the genocide framing, despite its methodological problems and questionable neutrality. But the biggest transformation came after the collapse of the USSR, when the famine narrative was elevated to the status of official state ideology in Ukraine under President Viktor Yushchenko. Textbooks were rewritten, museums and memorials multiplied, diplomatic campaigns demanded that foreign governments recognize the famine as a uniquely Ukrainian genocide. Death tolls were inflated from the scholarly range of 5 to 7 million to fantastical claims of 10 million Ukrainians, including regions like Galicia and Transcabia, that were not even part of the Soviet Union during the famine years. Contrast this with what serious historical scholarship actually shows. The famine was a Soviet-wide disaster, with some of the worst mortality in Kazakhstan and the Volga and Kuban. Its causes were ideological fanaticism, catastrophic collectivism policies, disastrous procurement quotas, environmental shocks, and widespread administrative brutality, not ethnic targeting. Repression was real, but it was directed at class categories, kulaks, the resistors, not nationalities. A tragedy, absolutely. A genocide specifically targeting at Ukrainians. The evidence simply does not support that conclusion. So why does the genocide narrative persist? Because it is politically invaluable. It provides Ukraine with a unifying national myth, serves as a moral weapon against Russia, strengthens Western geopolitical narratives, and simplifies an incredible complex historical event into a clean good versus evil morality tale. In other words, the famine was not only being remembered, it was being rebranded. And once tragedy becomes branding, the dead are no longer honoured, they are instrumentalized. And if you think this weaponizing history is bad, wait until you see what happens when governments decide to do the same thing with your behaviour in real time. Let's travel now to New Zealand, where the future has arrived early and not in a good way, in a quiet, understated, don't worry, this is for your safety kind of way. The country's three major banks, ANZ, BNZ and Westpac, have begun rolling out a new set of rules for online banking that represent one of the most dramatic expansions of behavioural surveillance we've ever seen in any Western democracy. Under the new system, customers are required, not asked, not encouraged, but required to allow the bank to collect detailed behavioural biometric data, such as the price of using their own online banking services. This includes how fast you type, how you swipe, your scrolling patterns, your device characteristics, your IP address and location, and even, in some cases, nearby device information and call status. This data is fed into behavioural analysis systems that build a digital footprint of your interaction style. The banks say it's strictly for fraud detection, and to be fair, fraud is a genuine threat. But the key point here is that customers do not have any meaningful choice. ANZ bluntly states that if you do not consent to behavioural monitoring, you cannot access online banking at all. BNZ and Westpac follow essentially the same model. In other words, comply or opt out of modern life. This isn't just about fraud, it's about normalising surveillance as a default condition of participating in everyday society. It's about conditioning people to accept that privacy is a luxury, not a right, and that corporations and governments have the authority to profile your behaviour down to your muscle memory. Critics have been quick to ask uncomfortable questions. How long is this behavioural data stored? Who are the third-party security partners receiving this data? What legal justifications do they fall under? Will this data eventually be integrated with digital ID systems, open banking platforms, or CBDCs? Could it be repurposed for credit scoring or risk profiling? The bank's answer is, in essence, trust us, which historically speaking has never gone wrong. Mainstream media in New Zealand has largely downplayed these concerns, choosing instead to frame behavioural biometrics as a necessary modern tool against rosing scams. But an independent analysis recognised what it really is, a test run for a system that, once entrenched, will never be rolled back. And the behaviour monitoring logic doesn't stop with individuals. Entire nations are now monitored, scored and assessed according to their behavioural patterns, not by banks, but by alliances, intelligence networks, and geopolitical blocs. Which now brings us to the largest behavioural analysis experiment of the 21st century, the proxy war in Ukraine. The The Western narrative claims the war in Ukraine began on the 24th of February 2022 when Russia suddenly launched an unprovoked invasion. But if we're being honest, and this show is nothing if not annoyingly honest, the war really began 8 years earlier in April 2014 when the new government in Kiev launched a military anti-terrorist operation against the Donetsk and Luhansk regions following the Maidan uprising. This operation, conducted alongside nationalist battalions with openly far-right ideologies, led to years of shelling, thousands of civilian deaths, and the entrenchments of a civil conflict. By conservative estimates, more than 15,000 people were killed between 2014 and 2022. This wasn't a border incident, this was a war, a slow, grinding, 8-year war that the West conveniently pretends didn't happen because it doesn't fit the script. The Minsk agreements, sold publicly as peace deals, were privately understood differently by Western and Ukrainian officials. They were not meant to produce a political settlement. They were meant to buy time for Ukraine to rebuild its military, integrate with NATO structures, expand intelligence sharing, and receive extensive Western arms. Western leaders have since admitted this openly, which explains Russia's current deep mistrust of any Western diplomatic commitments. By 2021, Ukraine had positioned substantial forces near the Donbass and Crimea, giving Russia the perception, valid or not, that the offensive was coming. From Moscow's perspective, losing access to the Sea of Azov, seeing Crimea isolated, or risking the Black Sea Fleet falling under NATO pressure would represent an existential strategic disaster. No Russian government, whether liberal, nationalist or technocrat, would tolerate that. At the same time, the broader backdrop matters. After the Cold War, there was a brief moment when the truly inclusive European security architecture could have been built, one that integrated Russia as a partner. Instead, NATO expanded steadily eastward, breaking de facto understandings and ignoring repeated warnings from diplomats, scholars, and even Western statesmen. Russia's overtures, including Putin's speech in the German Bundestag, calling for cooperation from Lisbon to Vladivostok, were met with polite applause and strategic dismissal. And so we arrive where we are now, a proxy war in which Ukraine is the terrain, not the cause. The real struggle is between the fading unipolar Western system and a rising Eurasian multipolar world centered around China, with Russia acting as a strategic hinge. The West needs Russia weakened to contain China. Russia needs Ukraine neutral to preserve its own security. And in the middle sits Ukraine, promised victory by the people who have no intention of sending their own soldiers to die for it. This is the architecture of the conflict, not the moral fable sold to Western audiences, but the hard, cold geopolitical reality. And now, after 10 years of war, escalation, sabotage, and strategic delusions, the same people who created this disaster present us with a 28-point peace plan that somehow manages to be both ambitious and incoherent. Now let's talk about the 28-point peace plan, the first proposal since 2014 that actually puts all the central issues on the table. The plan covers everything: territorial control, Ukraine's military posture, NATO membership, sanctions, frozen assets, and the future security architecture of Eastern Europe. The most sensitive issue is the Donbass. The plan requires Ukraine to withdraw from the final pockets of the Donbass still under its control. These areas would be demilitarized and administered by Russia, while Russian forces would commit not to advance further. On paper, this territory represents roughly 1% of Ukraine's total landmass, a tiny fraction. But politically and psychologically, it is enormous. After years of propaganda framing these towns as heroic bulwarks against eternal evil, simply withdrawing becomes a symbol of defeat, even if militarily it makes perfect sense. European counter-proposals complicate matters further. Some call for even a larger Ukrainian army, 600,000 to 800,000 soldiers, despite the fact that Ukraine, in Istanbul negotiations early in the war, was prepared to accept a cap of 250,000. Others insist on keeping the NATO door symbolically open, even though everyone privately knows Ukraine is not joining NATO anytime soon. There are even suggestions of European troops stationed inside Ukraine, proposals that collapse the moment you ask which country actually plans to send them. These positions may be negotiation tactics, or they may be deliberate sabotage designed to make the plan unacceptable to Russia, thereby prolonging the war until someone else takes politically responsibility for the eventual disaster and failure. Meanwhile, Russia has its own minimum requirements: Ukrainian neutrality, control over Donbass, and a settlement that does not humiliate its leadership in front of domestic hardliners. Sanctions and frozen assets appear to be areas where Moscow might accept gradual stage adjustments rather than immediate relief. The shadow of Minsk hangs over everything. Russia no longer believes Western treaties last beyond a single election cycle. Trust is gone, which means any new government will require mechanisms that are verifiable, enforceable, and insulated from political winds. Limits on deployments, missile ranges, troop movements, and air asset placements. The unglamorous but essential machinery of arms control. And the EU membership question remains a ticking bomb. If the EU fails to deliver membership, Ukraine will feel betrayed. If the EU tears up its own rules to rush Ukraine in, it may destabilize itself. Either way, the tension between Ukraine's ethno-nationalist elements and the EU's liberal technocratic values is not going away. Ultimately, the war will not end with a 1945-style victory parade. There will be no march on Moscow, no liberation of Kiev, no total conquest of the other side. What is on the table is two outcomes: an ugly, partial, unsatisfying settlement now, or a much more catastrophic settlement later, after more territory is lost, more lives are spent, and more illusions are shattered. This is the reality behind the 28-point peace plan. It is not a road to victory. It is a question. That is, do you want to stop bleeding now or later? And speaking of victories, let's talk about one team that is winning these days. And before we wrap up tonight, let's end with something that makes sense, brings joy and actually improves with time, something that cannot be said about NATO, banking apps or peace negotiations. Dynamo Minsk. While governments gaslight populations and alliances gaslight entire continents, Dynamo Minsk has been doing what it does best, quietly winning hockey games across time zones that require astral navigation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Bison fans, and anyone who accidentally clicked this stream while looking for cat videos, Dynamo Minsk have officially completed their annual adventure known as Let's Fly 8,000 kilometers east and still pretend we're not jet-lagged. 2 games, 2 results, and approximately 47 time zones passed along the way. So let's break it down. Game 1, November 30th. Admiral Vladivostok, Dynamo Minsk, aka Bisons arrive and immediately pillage the port. The boys landed in Vladivostok and did exactly what you're supposed to do when you travel all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Steal 2 points and leave quickly before anyone notices. With a 4-1 win, Dynamo hit first place in the West, cracked 100 plus goals, and left Admiral wondering whether they'd actually played against the KHL All-Star team. It was a powerful road win and the Bisons were rolling. Let's watch those goals by the Bisons now.
Он был вызван в Минское Динамо. Бросок, опасное добивание. Это гол! Виталий Пинчук открывает счет в этой встрече.
Давать шайбу. Ну же! И вот она! Не было? Все-таки стоило бы. Так шайба была. Это 2-0. Уэле. Надо бросать Уэле. И неплохой бросок. Абин только опять своего попал. И третья. Вот она, Егор Бориков. Это 3-0. Но, думаю, знаете, вот в такой игре Василий может все равно себе ставить плюс. Ну же, да, в воротах она четвертая. 4-1.
Last match, Vasha Demchenko pulled in at the right time and we scored our moments, realized the majority. Definitely a good game turned out. Well, really, a difficult start for us, a difficult trip, plus there is no game at 10 and 12, and this affects our condition. But nevertheless, we played according to the assignment, and it's good that you played the first football, or there was a fragment of finishing. Goal 2 was also Vadim Frost gave me empty-handed. All I had to do was score. It absolutely won't be easier at all. You must thoroughly prepare, recover adequately, and handle all necessary steps. Go on with play. Achieving victory is paramount, winning above all else, but the standings are not our primary concern. With half a season and a full playoff segment remaining, the focus must be sustained on consistent performance and maintaining momentum.
And then there was game 2 on December 2nd.
You know, we've done a good job adjusting and kind of staying on the Minsk time zone, so even though it's super late at night right now, it doesn't feel like it. It feels like normal practice, and we'll be ready to go tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it's a unique trip, that's for sure, but something that every team in the league has to do. So I think, you know, we just tried to prepare like any other game and not complain about anything and just approach it like a normal game. We're going to leave everything we got on the ice, and we're going to give it our all, play hard, and hopefully come home with another win. Yeah, they play a different style than us, but you know, I think it's, again, I think I've said before that we don't focus that much on what other teams do. Obviously, we make some little adjustments, but our biggest concern is how we play, and if we play our structure and our style of hockey, then we should have a good result. Yesterday,
Humour, Khabarovsk, 2-3 Dynamo Minsk, or like I like to call it, the jet lag strikes back. This one is a proper grinder after 60 minutes of hockey, tied 2-2. Overtime, also 2-2. Both teams skating like they were trapped in a Siberian snow globe. So we went to a shootout. Normally the Dynamo fans reached for the nearest stress medications, but not today. Dynamo stepped up and buried 3 shootout goals like it was nothing, while Humour managed just 1. Final score, Dynamo 3, Humour 2. Another 2 points in the bag. Another Far East team are left staring into the void. Let's watch those goals by Dynamo Minsk.
Хэмилтон. Хэмилтон на пятак, проходит передача, гол! Гол, первая шайба Николая Салыга в континентальной хоккейной лиге.
Кто-то помогал, молодой балда ему зацепиться за эту шайбу! Но рано или поздно такое тоже должно было случиться. Там как бы здорово в ближнем не играл сегодня Максим Дорожко.
Well, a difficult match turned out to be a tie. A difficult game was very good that we won it. Here in 2, there was exactly the same moment in 3. Well, it happened. In fact, seeing Shabelski and doing it instinctively just as it worked, you need to cheer him up, as if they cancelled the goals and we began to play even more actively. Due to our activity, we have turned the game around, and we have guys who come out to beat the masters of their department. As if 3 out of 3 came out, they scored and won everything. He always wants to win, especially when you win 3 out of 3 on a trip. Games are always pleasant, as it were. I don't know what else to say, but very, very important and very enjoyable. In any case, we need to rest, rebuild a little, and continue the season with new strength.
Gutsy win. We were down, but you know, on the bench we never panicked. We never felt like we were out of the game. We were only down 1. Vasa was doing a fantastic job keeping us in it, and the young guys really showed up today. Really gave us a lot of energy. Bori and Lipa, Moroz, and then Saligo scores his first goal. So everyone was super excited about that, and yeah, I mean we battled it out and got the win. I think Usi won the face-off, and our play is I skate down into the corner and see if I can find something. I saw Saligo kind of slide backside there, but the puck made it through 20 feet, and then he made a great shot. He put it back 5-hole, and yeah, no, we were all super excited for him. We all know Sammy. Sammy's fantastic at the shootout. He's demonstrated that over the last 3 years, and Pin's got a couple really snazzy, nice shootout goals this year, and DT's one of the best in the league. Everybody knows that, so I mean, that's a tough lineup to go up against if whoever you are. And again, Vasa did a great job making a save for us when we needed it, and again, yeah, got the win. So yeah, really hard road trip. Everyone knows the out east trip is really hard. On top of we had to go and play a good team in Torpedo to start. But again, we had a couple injuries, guys out of the lineup, and we had some guys step up big. Like again, I'm going to mention the young guys. They were really flying. They were noticeably really fast. And Bori, a couple goals in Vladivostok. Lipa's making nice plays. All those guys are really stepping up when you got a Shipachov out of the lineup or something like that. And yeah, Saligo first goal again. So yeah, it's been good. That's kind of really helped us and gave us energy for this long, hard trip.
2 games, 2 wins, a regulation victory and a shootout win. First place in the West remains very much alive, and the Bisons continue to please notice us. KHL Revenge Tour. Now let's get back to Minsk, where the oxygen is normal, the time zone makes sense, and the fans actually exist. If only Europe's leaders could play geopolitics the way Dynamo plays hockey, the world would be a much calmer place and much better organised. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the global gaslighting project, from Stalin to smartphones, from famine myths to behavioural surveillance, from proxy wars to peace plans that read like plot twists in a bad television series. A world where governments rewrite history, rewrite the present, and occasionally attempt to rewrite you. But don't worry, we're here every Sunday and Wednesday now to do the thing they absolutely hate, tell the story straight. Thank you for watching, thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for staying sane in a century that keeps trying to make that impossible. We'll see you on Sunday. Good night. Bye-bye.